Ladies and gentlemen, welcome, welcome, welcome. The first bullet point on my list is we're video live streaming this podcast, but you don't need to know
Yay.
that. You're
Of
just
course. What do you
listening.
mean? Of course they do.
Oh, well, I mean, they need to know that, but contextually, you're listening to this if you're not part of the live stream right now.
Yeah, but
If
if
you,
you are listening to this right now, then you could be watching it.
okay, I'm Kenny Myers, and with me, as always, is my dearest, oldest friend,
Matthew Anderson.
Matthew Anderson. I don't think actually any of that is true. Those adjectives. So I have good news as I read this off my phone. We are expanding the Chips and Bits empire. Like the American and British empires before us, we are planting flags in places they are unwanted and taking money for it.
Maybe.
We have launched Patreon tiers. So if you go to patreon.com/Matt,
Chips and bits.
is it just all one word? No dashes?
I believe so. But it's in
Cool.
the notes, Kenny.
Hey, the notes are where it's at. Yeah, so we have a Discord now. You can come and chat with us. We have live streams. We have an extra monthly episode if you pay us enough money. And we have a newsletter, which was free, and now it's not. But you didn't really know about it anyway because I was doing it as a hobby.
That's true.
That's my cool thing. Lots of things were once free, and now they're not. Welcome to capitalism. Let's see. Existing Patreons or patrons, which I just think is weird. Please, if you give us money, remember to pick a tier very soon. Or do we eradicate them? I'm not sure what happens.
No, the reason why it's important for existing patrons to join a tier is because Patreon forces you when you want to send stuff out to your patrons to pick a tier. And so if you're just on an existing pledge prior to us adding tiers to Patreon, you won't get any of the new shinies when we send them out. You're just in the ether as far as Patreon's concerned. So not to us. We still consider you awesome.
No, I actually, if you're not in the right Patreon tier, you are no longer a part of this universe.
But the long story short is, existing patrons, we love you still. But if you could join a tier, that would make our life very easy. And we'd love you even more.
Yeah, so we're actually putting effort into this thing instead of just time. And we think that it'll be pretty cool. So please check out Patreon. There's a lot of cool stuff that we're going to be doing. A lot more stuff. If 30 minutes, 10 months a year isn't enough, you can get a lot more. Including a Game of the Year podcast, which we've never done before, which will be a long form format of me probably drinking alcohol and making fun of Matt. So something to look forward to. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Even
mean,
I would look forward to that.
you can't have a Game of the Year podcast without beverages of choice, just as a thing. So now we're going to do our awkward live stream pause because we're live streaming this thanks to our Patreon tiers, where we make room for the title cards, the titles, not cards. I'm really bad at this still. But on the other hand, it's good to be back.
Not bad.
That was pretty good. That was
Yeah, it
pretty
was.
good. That was a great pause. Well, Matt, how about you tell the folks what game we're talking about today?
We are talking about Marvel's, the apostrophe, Spider-Man with a dash, colon, Miles Morales.
Marvel's Spider-Man and Miles Morales. That's right.
That's
A,
the one.
a game released for
Uh, PS5?
and for, but we played the
PS5.
because now it's time to play PS5 games. That's a good
Okay,
job. Good
yay.
guess.
All right,
You did it. You really did it. Oh man, just come back shooting aces.
We're
Ah.
rusty. We're rusty.
So anyway, the PS5 is in our homes. We managed to acquire them by only small ritual sacrifice and one of my children.
Yes. I was gonna say large ritual sacrifice, but I forgot that you hate your kids.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that would be large. You know, it's really per pound, not really necessarily
Okay, yeah, so medium size then.
per emotional, per emotional commitment. Um, and so this is not one of the like a. I would say Miles Morales is not a pure PlayStation 5 game for a lot of reasons, but it takes advantage of so many of the features of the PS5. So you can kind of see this as a mix of both, I imagine, as we'll be talking about the new experience mixed with Miles Morales, um,
Yeah.
and what that does. So, uh, which brings us to another interesting point, which is Matt and I actually had very different looking games. Uh,
Did we?
because when Matt played Miles Morales, although you have played it recently, but when Matt played Miles Morales, they hadn't released a mode that allows you to do ray tracing in 60 frames per second.
That's true.
But
But they they
I had
did.
that the whole time.
They released it halfway through my playthrough.
Halfway. Okay, so you got a good enough look at like the
Yeah,
how that worked. Um, yeah, and that was pretty cool. Uh, Matt, what did you think of Spider-Man Miles Morales?
I loved it. I loved it a lot. I thought it was fantastic. Super fun.
Well, why don't you expand on that because we have time to fill.
Well, if you recall, we podcasted about the other Spider-Man game
Hmm.
in the past generation. I don't know how 2 years ago, 2 seasons ago, and we loved that game as well.
Loved
This
it a
is,
lot.
yeah, this is one of those examples where even if you weren't, even if you didn't know that you were looking for more Spider-Man action, swinging around New York and feeling like a superhero, you were, and this game proves it to you. It picks off up almost exactly where the last story left off. You're playing a different Spider-Man character in Harlem, and yeah, it's one of those things where it's like they threw in some new stuff you weren't expecting. Like the music is particularly fun and a new little wrinkle in this game,
I would say
integrated into
like
sort of.
better.
Yeah. It's part of the cutscenes. It's part of the segues between character discussions and missions, and it's super great. Uh, it's quick, like if you like, I did a second playthrough just so I could unlock the trophies, and if you're just going through just the story and nothing else, it's pretty fast. I mean, you can get through in just a couple hours.
Well,
But it
that depends. I mean, you were playing on New Game Plus, which is
Yeah, so I was like
you're hyper
invincible the second
powered.
time through.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. But the good thing is, just like uh, the original new Spider-Man, there's tons of stuff to do, and I mean, it's one of those things where you get thrown into the game, and immediately, like you're immediately just swinging around and jumping on Rhino's back and crashing through a mall and
Yeah.
beating up baddies and learning all your tricks of the web again, and it's immediate action, and it just spirals into insanity from there. There's tons of stuff to collect, and it's all fun because the core mechanic of just swinging around the city and doing tricks and learning the different swinging and jumping and acrobatic mechanics. It's just fun. Like it's one of those things where even though you have fast travel, you'll find yourself not fast traveling from time to time, just so you can spend some extra time swinging and zipping, and it's super cool.
Swinging and zipping and
Yep,
punching
exactly,
and kicking.
exactly.
Uh, I have a very interesting mixed feeling about Miles Morales. So,
Interesting.
Miles Morales you can buy for PlayStation 5, and if you buy a specific one, you get Spider-Man remastered, pretty much using a lot of the same visuals of Miles Morales to a degree, I want to say. A lot of the mechanics are the same. And for the first time, I played through the DLC, which you played through when it came out, but I didn't.
I think I played all but the last DLC. Yes.
Yeah. And it's not the best DLC, but it tells an interesting story. And one of the things that happened was I played Spider-Man Remastered after I finished. Sorry, I played the main game of Spider-Man Remastered before I started Miles Morales. So I went through it all
Oh, cool.
again.
Yeah.
And it was just as enjoyable, and it looked cool, and they have a new Spider-Man face, and he's way too young looking.
Yeah, that
And
was weird. What is up
I
with
don't
that?
know.
Why'd they
I
do
don't
that?
know why that. I don't know why they did that. I don't. Maybe it's SAG. I don't know. They probably SAG AFTRA or whatever it's called. I get it. Hey,
I
it's
don't. I
important.
don't think that's what it
It's
was.
important that actors have pensions. Uh, and then And I jumped right into Miles, and that was great. Like, it was super fun. I was a little bit, because I did everything in Spider-Man. I was a little bit strung out on Spider-Man style games, and Miles isn't like Miles is an evolution, not a revolution. It's like,
Yeah.
um, it's pretty much the same combat mechanics, and then they just layer stuff on top of it. That's really, really great. And so at the beginning, I was like a little frustrated, but then like it just sucked me in so well that I just loved it. In particular, the writers of the Spider-Man games know that they only get like one game every 3 or 4 years, and they take story risks that I think are exceptional. Like stuff they can't do in comic books or even the movies because of like a constant release cycle. And Miles Morales is no exception. The story is just as good as this first Spider-Man story, maybe even better.
I thought it was better.
And
And mainly, if I was to give one quick caveat, I think even if you didn't think it was better on its own merits, the fact that it doesn't have any of the weird, cheesy, corny side distractions that the original one does, just that alone makes it better.
yes, no fucking sneak missions, Mary Jane.
Oh my god.
Or
Get 'em outta
Miles.
here.
Yeah, they were
Get 'em outta
terrible. And playing them again, they were terrible too. Except
Yes.
this time, I knew that I could hit R2 and run through them, which I didn't know the first time, and that was painful.
I didn't know that either, actually.
Yeah, yeah. It's not explicit. So another thing happened when I finished Miles Morales and I went back to play the DLC of Spider-Man, which I enjoyed. I noticed what I thought was new in Miles Morales was actually in a lot of the layers that they added, in terms of like they have like crime scenes that you find around the city and stuff like that. Had already been in the DLC, but the DLC does ramp up to the story, which is Spider-Man takes the vacation with Mary Jane. Miles is training, and you start like right when that vacation starts. The swinging mechanic is still one of the most fun, if not the most fun, like mechanic or grappling mechanic in any game.
Yep.
The story was great. It looked better than Spider-Man did, and Spider-Man still looks great. It's a really nice version of Miles Morales. Yeah,
especially some of the set pieces. I just I told you I would finish my second playthrough before we podcasted, so some of it was fresh in my mind, and just going through that last battle sequence where it's all the like neon reds and blues and everything is glowing and the light bounces off the ground. There's broken glass everywhere and the light's refracting off of your costume, and it's just like, this is insane.
Yeah, and going off like, I mean, on its own merits, Miles Morales is a really fun game, but it's fun also to compare it to Spider-Man, because the best part of Spider-Man, in my opinion, was in terms of like game sequences, like set pieces, was when the Sinister Six get broken out of prison. Like,
awesome.
You're fighting, it's a hard fight, and then you're swinging after Electro, and that was like really the only one of those in the games. Like there wasn't any really other big set pieces.
Well, there's the Vulture and Electro.
But that's not a set. That's not a big set piece. It's all in the same location, and you're just knocking them down, and it's fun. Like, that's the combat mechanics. That's like a whole different topic. But in this case, those big set pieces, like with Rhino and with the antagonist in this, and they were so good and so fun, and there were more of them that felt like that raft sequence in Raft is the name of the prison in Spider-Man.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, it's hard not to love Miles Morales. He is such a lovable character.
Yeah, totally.
And I don't know, like, it's interesting how I saw how the Spider-Man and the DLC informed and also set up Miles Morales. Like, they were obviously working on some of this stuff on the engine.
It was funny hearing you talk about that, because I had completely spaced out on the like detective sequences. I remember them being like when you said that, I was like, oh yeah, I remember that from the Spider-Man DLC. And I was like, no, there was a couple of those in Miles Morales. Now that's just I remember doing those.
Yeah, and it was really very much like, oh, I thought this was new in Miles Morales, but all they did was do what Miles Morales does best, which is take what is fantastic and put like this beautiful icing on it. Like
Mhm.
it's brief but not too brief. You get new combat abilities in probably one of the most fun combat systems in video games.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on the new combat
So
mechanisms.
essentially, what they add is this venom mechanism, because Miles Morales can do a couple
Not the
things.
villain Venom.
Right. He's in a tank and it's hairy.
Yeah. That's going to be awkward.
It is.
Oh, it's Venom. My powers are called Venom.
That's so crazy. We should do like a remix together. I assume.
We
That's
should
what.
start a podcast.
Let's record some boat sounds together. Um, there's I lost my train of thought because I just kept thinking about these weird sound
Talking
recording
about
missions you do.
Oh yeah, those are funny. The combat mechanics, the new ones they added.
So
there's
they add a layer of
invisibility.
like a super, I would say like super powers on top of your already superpowers. It's essentially like you
Yeah.
get ultimate moves, and then you design and level up your character to make those moves just extravagantly destructive.
Yeah,
Uh,
and they're like the Venom stuff. The closest thing I can relate it to is the infamous style powers,
oh
yeah,
yeah, for sure.
sort of like electricity based, but not electricity. And you can use it to overcharge and punch through shields. You can use it to lift people. You can use it to pound on people, zoom across the map, that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Uh, for me, and then there's an invincibility power.
Invisibility.
Invisibility. God damn it,
Yep.
that's gonna show up in the notes.
Always does.
Always does. There's an invisibility power, which can make you feel invincible. Um, that actually adds another element to the game that I really like, which is like you can re-sneak. In
Yeah.
Spider-Man, when you start, like you enter regions where there's like a lot of heights and stuff, and you can sneak around, but the moment you're discovered, you're in combat. You're like punching people.
Yep.
In Miles Morales, you can actually jump between them to your liking, depending on when your power's ready. Uh, and I loved that. I actually really love the ability to like reset sneaking. The villains are hard. Like I play these games on their hardest modes.
Yep.
It's hard combat, but it's so fun to just like disappear and like they get surprised. It's hilarious.
Yeah, I like the direction that they took with the new mechanics, and it's not really a gripe. But the one thing I did notice, especially after playing through it a second time, was that I definitely remember the first time through when you become so accustomed to, first of all, how good the combat system is in this game, just to begin with, just outright.
Yeah,
If you're just punching and kicking and flipping, I mean,
yeah, which is from
it's
Spider-Man. It's
yeah,
just phenomenal.
it's that extended Batman-esque, countering and jumping and punching system, and it's awesome and super fun. But you can do everything you need to do with that, if you needed to the extent that the way that I found that those new powers were added in, uh, I I almost never used them. Like I'd use them when I got into trouble, or I'd use them when they're automatic, but I didn't find myself relying on them as much as I think I probably could.
Mm-hmm.
The invisible power, for example, the best way I found to utilize it was to activate this special power up in which if you were seen during an attack, it would automatically trigger. So that was helpful because to avoid what you just actually hinted at, I never found myself triggering between seen and unseen. I would be unseen, and then I'd make sure I stayed unseen because it would automatically trigger, and I'd never have to manually do it. The second time I went through, combined with two things. One, I was super overpowered, so it was almost impossible for me to die. But
Mm-hmm.
second, I was going fast. Like I wasn't trying to sneak as much. I was trying to just like run through the thing as fast as I could. I used all those powers all the time
Mm-hmm.
and to devastating effect. I mean, like they are insanely overpowered if you can learn how to string them together. So I think in hindsight, again, not a gripe, but the thing that sticks out to me, especially in hindsight, is I think I wish they'd done a better job of forcing you to use those powers more than for just breaking into buildings at times, so that you got more comfortable with using them and used them more often.
Did you play on the hardest difficulty?
The second time through, the first time through, I played on just below the hardest, so it would have been 2 down from super hard.
There is no getting through that game without those powers on the hardest difficulty.
I could see that, yeah.
Like, the enemies were so destructive constantly, and they had such high health, and bullets did much higher damage, that I could not get through areas without all of my it's so funny you mentioned that. Like, all of my gear was channeled towards making sure my venom built up, because it built up like a meter
Quick, yeah.
as quickly as possible, so I could use the venom powers against the guys. Like, I was a venom machine. I used punch like one does liberally, but I don't think a fight went by when I didn't fire at least 15 or 20 of those as far as I could. Like, that's a really rough estimate, and towards the later game, but like, it was intense, and without those, the combat would have been too hard.
Yeah, no, I can see that in my second playthrough again, even though I'm mostly invincible because I'm just so overpowered.
Yeah.
You couldn't take the same tactics as you did in the first playthrough, where you would just, take out as many people as you could before being seen, and then kind of just run around the map and kill everybody one by one. Like, if you didn't take out the snipers first, and then the guys that could throw those like stunning weapons, and then to clear everybody out as fast as possible in certain orders, and you stood in the middle of the fray, you'd be dead in just a second. I mean, you just could not survive for longer than 10 seconds.
One other thing this game does in terms of reimagining, similar to how they take risks to stories, is they really do a good job of, similar to how Arkham Asylum and Spider-Man did it, of reimagining villains in their own aesthetic.
Yes.
I mean, this is a spoiler podcast, but the main villain's the Tinkerer, and the Tinkerer's outfit is fucking great.
Dope.
And
super dope.
It's so great, and how it like works and moves and moves around is incredible. And it reminds me of I sent a text message. I don't know what that is because we're on a podcast, so only audio is usually what we communicate with. Only audio, he said on this now live stream.
On the video podcast.
The mechanics of it, the way it looks like Isaac's suit from Dead Space.
Yes. Yeah.
And
at least
Isaac's
the unlocking fate.
Isaac's suits are one of the greatest video game pieces of armor ever. They are so cool, and essentially the Tinker, you're just fighting Isaac.
Except Isaac with weapons that do that too.
Much smarter too.
Yeah.
And also concludes with, I mean, the Tinkerer is traditionally not a athletic, strong villain, and they twist that by making the Tinkerer a peer of Miles in this one.
And young.
And the last battle was one of the coolest fucking things. I mean, it reminded me of the God of War battle. Where you're just, it's a set piece mixed with a battle, like where you're physically fighting, you have to dodge, you have to learn the attacks, but you can like throw the person out the window, and it becomes like your own mini set piece as you break the glass and throw them out, or you can jump out them. It's really phenomenal.
Yeah, and it's tiered too. So there's like a couple different sections, like different vibes, different move sets, different set pieces, different locations.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I felt was really, really cool and somewhat unique, I can't think of another time I've experienced something like this, is that the sort of arc of the story, especially related to the character development of you sort of coming to a final at odds battle with a close friend of yours in this story, that arc is sort of hitting its peak and concluding at the same time that you are progressing towards the end of this boss fight, and they meet in perfect harmony at the end of the boss fight. So it's like, and I guess it's harder to describe now that I hear myself saying it out loud, but basically there's this awareness factor where you're trying to convince your friend they're doing the wrong thing, but you also understand what their motivation is, so it's hard to talk them out of their position.
Right.
And through having to battle your friend, the enemy is starting to feel very upset and shaken about what they're trying to do in the battle, which is kill you. They don't want to be doing it, and you don't want to be doing it, and you both don't want to be doing it. It was just, it was a super rad way to sort of draw those two things together because it added to both the tension and also the motivation to try and progress through the boss fight and get to the end of the game. It was well done.
Yeah, the emotional stakes, as
Yeah.
well as the like, superhero stakes were just so well earned. Like,
Yep.
amazing how in such a short period of time, especially when you play through superpowered, it's like an hour and a half, 2 hours.
Yeah.
How much that's conveyed, and I mean,
Hmm.
always a tribute to both the writers and the voice actors for just selling it.
Oh yeah. I mean, to be fair, I skipped most of the cinematic cutscenes on my second playthrough, and still at the end, it got me. I was like, oh, this story, it's good.
Yeah, yeah, that it ends really well. I don't know. It feels good. Like, one of the things that I left like Miles Morales with was, first of all, just astonished at the last battle of it. Like, it was so good. Astonished that they could top a lot of the stuff they did in this original Spider-Man, and just like totally ready for Spider-Man 2 co-op or something like that. Like,
Sure.
Miles and Peter fighting against the city. It was just so good. Although I just played like 30 hours of Spider-Man, so I'll probably take a little break.
That sounds good. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll probably take a tiny break.
And so like graphics quality and sort of fidelity and lighting, all that aside, uh, we also haven't talked about yet how this was like the perfect, to me, like a perfect showcase of some of the other stuff that I assume is coming on this next generation of consoles. Because another main selling point, ironically, of this game is how fast it is, like how fast it loads, how fast everything goes. I mean, you boot this thing up, the game launches in under 10 seconds. From clicking all the buttons, loading your save games, getting onto the street, dressed up as Spider-Man. I mean, it's 10 seconds or less. And then there's not a single loading screen from start to finish. I mean, that's it. That's all you got to do. I mean, that's pretty cool.
One of the things I remember from the original Spider-Man was, instead of taking fast travel, you'd swing to places because it was just as quick.
Because the train took forever.
Because the train was slow and it just took a long time. And it's fun to swing, so you just did it. But in this version of the game, it's instant. You don't even get like a little loading cutscene.
No.
You just click on a place and
Fade
then
to
you're
black.
there
Yeah.
in like a
Fade to
second.
black, 1 second, walk out of the subway.
Like, I was fast traveling like every 2 seconds. I'd be like, well, let's go get that. And then I'd go over there and I'd get it. And the same for the remaster. They did the same thing. And it was spectacular. Like, it was amazing. One might say it was an amazing fantasy. You could just go anywhere quickly. And it was so nice.
Yeah.
Especially for a collectible open world game like this. Like, it's really nice to have it condensed so that you don't really have to fucking run 3 hours to get something.
Yes. Yeah.
And beyond that, I didn't really care for I'm not a fan of the PlayStation 5 remote. I think it's fine. It's very gimmicky, and I don't keep track of it. Like, after the first bits, I'm just like, oh, it's vibrating.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't notice it that much in Miles specifically. I mean, there's not much of the fancy wizardry stuff.
Except a subway. The subway was cool.
I don't remember. What was that?
When you're on the subway trucks, you can feel the bump, 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 bump
yeah.
through the controller. Yes. That's the only time I thought I was like, oh yeah, that's cool. I didn't really care for the tension of because you get the tension of the web with this PlayStation 5 controller. That was fine. It wasn't like, oh, this is so cool. I could put more physical strain on my hands to swing around the city. That's awesome.
I get it, man. You're a controller curmudgeon. It's fine.
Yeah, because I'm an elite controller gamer. You know that. You know I got that Xbox Elite Patreon money to buy those nice controllers.
Was there anything you didn't like, that you disliked about Miles Morales?
I'm not a huge fan of like the generic crime stuff. I really like side quests to be more interesting now, and it's sort of it weighs on me a little bit. Sometimes I can get really zen about it, and you kind of get, for me, it gets into like a zen collectible mode, because you get, completion of districts. It's a very open. It's the open world mechanics, the Ubisoft open world mechanics, and yeah, I didn't really care for that too much, but there was a lot of good stuff too, and it wasn't as much as Spider-Man. What about you, Matt? Matt
The
Anderson?
only the only thing I didn't super enjoy was the go around and record the music for your uncle. Try and find those. I mean, it- the the notion behind it, like the story that brought you into those missions was great. Some of the sounds that you end up finding, like and thinking about using them in the music beat, it's cool. You're like, oh, cool, train tracks. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's neat. And the payoff once you finish those side missions was awesome.
yeah.
But finding them was a lot more tedious than I felt like it needed to be. And so I was like, I don't really want to do another one of those missions. And I would find myself putting those ones off. That was really about it, though.
Yeah, they weren't that fun. I liked each piece you found came with a little narrative, which I always really like that, and that's like a
Yep.
nice little reward. But it was just kind of like, this is fine.
Well, but yeah, like they had literally another collector mission that comes from your mom at the end of the game,
Hmm.
and it retells the story of your dad, and it's like your birthday or something. It's like a birthday, go find stuff around the city, like a scavenger hunt.
Yeah, it's an
Where
epilogue. It's a
yeah,
sweet epilogue.
it's really good.
Yeah,
None of that like Mary Jane bullshit from the first one. None of that.
yeah,
It's awesome. So they have the capacity to do it, and I think they just thought it was going to be a kind of a neat mechanic, and it's a little bit more of a direct kind of character story arc link between you and your uncle, which makes sense.
yeah.
It was just tedious. That was all.
Your uncle, who's in Miles Morales lore, is the Prowler, and if you haven't seen Into the Spider-Verse, plays a prominent part in that. And that movie may be one of the best superhero movies of all time.
Yep.
Lot of good in Spider-Man's camp right now. Like
Yep.
a lot of really good games. Comic books are okay. Uh, the movies are killing it, and Into the Spider-Verse is also a part of that. And I'm so glad Miles Morales is such a big character. He was so interesting when he was created, and he's just really compelling, especially as Spider-Man gets older, of just like this different viewpoint on Spider-Man. And they really did a nice job crafting this.
Yeah. And we didn't even talk about. We're getting long in the tooth here, and we didn't even talk about any of the supporting characters, which there were some struggles with the supporting characters in the original Spider-Man, and in this one, there's even more, you know, either side characters directly or at least like secondary characters through like side missions and people in the neighborhood, and all of them are great. All of them
Yeah.
are super fantastic. They're well voiced. They fit into the story.
We
And
didn't even talk about the suits, Matt.
No, we didn't, because otherwise we would have been talking about Catsuit.
But it's 32 minutes, and you know what that means.
Means we got to cut it off.
It's time to talk about our Patreon again. No, it's time to cut it off. Because 10 minutes was dedicated to our intro. Yeah, I would say you can play Miles Morales on PS4. You should play it on a PS5 if you can get one.
Good luck.
Good luck. We wish you the best.
Kenny's out of children, unfortunately.
Yep. And, you can only do the ritual once. So, with the ritual done and our first podcast in the bag, I'm Kenny Myers, and with me, as always,
Matthew Anderson.
And thank you so much for listening and
Or watching.
viewing. And I promise you, if you're just a listener, we'll stop talking about the live stream. It's just new right now. So, but we won't live stream. Thanks for paying. Anyway, goodbye, friends.
See you next month.